There were many great guitarists who took to the stage at the Woodstock Festival in the summer of 1969. Players like Johnny Winter and Jimi Hendrix, just to name a few. In this video, I picked out 3 guitarists who I think the show had a huge effect on their lives and career, then and later on. Some it may have helped, and some it may have hurt. Let's take a look back and find out a little more about each one of them and about their time at Woodstock. First up is Carlos Santana. Carlos Santana started out playing guitar on the streets of Mexico as a young boy, and he ended up a 10-time Grammy winner, elected to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There were many ups and downs getting there, and I mean some really high ups and some really low downs. But through it all, Santana still stands tall and should be considered as one of the all-time great guitarists ever. Carlos Santana was born on July 20th, 1947 in Alvin Lee, Navarro, Mexico. His father, Jose, was an accomplished violinist, and as a child, Carlos learned to play the instrument from his father. But he didn't really enjoy the tones he created. He would eventually take up the electric guitar, for which he developed a passion for playing. Growing up, he was no stranger to poverty. In 1955, the family moved to Tijuana, Mexico. As a teenager, Santana began performing in the Tijuana strip clubs, inspired by the American rock and roll and blues music of artists like B.B. King, Johnny Lee Hooker, and Muddy Waters. In 1965, he moved up with his family, this time to San Francisco, and became a naturalized American citizen. In October 1966, Carlos started the Santana Blues Band, later to be known simply as Santana. Santana was a band of young and really talented musicians in the San Francisco Bay Area that were very well known on the West Coast, but had not released their first album yet. It was completed and in the can, ready to be released when they appeared on the stage at Woodstock. Carlos said, "We flew to the stage in this helicopter. I saw this living organism like an ocean of people, hair and colors, and I'm like, oh yeah, you know? When I get there, Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead turned me on to some medicine." Now I've heard Carlos describe it as peyote, mescaline, mushrooms, or even LSD. Either way, we can pretty much take it to the bank he was tripping. He said, "We were supposed to have 7 or 8 hours before we were to go on. I figured I had plenty of time," he laughed. But the last thing that Woodstock would be known for is a smooth schedule, and soon, while peaking on his trip, Carlos and the group were told that they were to go on right now. So with the guitar neck of an electric snake, as Carlos described it, him and the rest of the band went on stage. Their performance that day was considered by many as one of the best of the 3-day festival. When the film of the concert was released the following year, Jimi Hendrix, who would close the 3 days of concerts, said that Santana was his favorite performance of the event. Carlos says that this was the breakout performance for the group. They played 8 songs and were paid $750 for it. After Woodstock, the self-titled debut LP, Santana, came out, introducing Santana's first top 10 hit, Evil Ways. The album stayed on Billboard's album charts for 2 years and was soon followed by 2 more classics and Billboard #1 albums, Abraxas and Santana 3. All through the 70s, his record sales were very good, even on into and through the 80s. Considering most groups have about a 10-year run at best before fading into a classic rock show, back out playing their old hits that made them famous, Santana had a 20-year run. Sure, he had a few albums you could call flops, but for the most part, his albums sold and the people still enjoyed his music. He seemed to get even better with age, but with that word age comes record executives who feels and acts just won't relate to the up-and-coming new fans looking for their style of music. So as the 90s rolled in, Carlos was in his mid-40s. He released a couple of albums. There was Spirits Dancing in the Flesh, Milagro in 1992, the live album Sacred Fire in 93, and a collaboration with his brother Jorge and nephew Carlos Hernandez titled Santana Brothers in 1994. But none were successes. Santana wanted to make more music, but he wanted to be sure it would be supported. Clive Davis listened to what Santana had to say and was intrigued by what he wanted to do. As Cosmic Carlos Santana put it, "I want to reconnect the molecules with the light." That was, to create an album of collaborations with some of the biggest names of the time while keeping true to his old sound. Davis knew people were skeptical of his signing Santana. Many people thought it was a nostalgia play, sign an older musician to appeal to the older audience and possibly lose money. But Davis truly believed in what Santana wanted to do. So the album Supernatural was recorded and then released in 1999. The album went diamond, selling more than 13 million copies that year. The song Smooth, which featured Matchbox 20's Rob Thomas, was the huge hit song that summer in 1999. The song stayed number one on the Billboard charts for 12 weeks, the most extended number one song that year. The Supernatural album exploded and put Santana back on top again. To date, it has sold over 15 million here in the United States and 10 million in other countries. In 2000, following the success of Supernatural, Santana was nominated for 9 Grammy Awards and winning 8 of those nominations, tying the record held by Michael Jackson for the most awards at a single Grammy ceremony. Throughout his career, Santana would be nominated for 14 Grammy Awards and would win it 10 times. When it comes to the guitar, Santana is probably one of the most influential around. His Latin rock blues style is looked up to by many young and old alike. When it comes to the young players, here's what he had to say. "The first thing that I would teach the new youngsters about music is like, don't touch the guitar yet. Just look at it. Can you hear the sound just by looking at it? Can you give yourself chills before you touch the guitar? If you can't, be and do something else. Because this is a way of life. You're giving birth to beauty when you play, you know? So give yourself chills. Otherwise, you might as well just be a mechanic dealing with a screwdriver or a hammer. You may also want to try not using so many pedals, because it's like putting on too much makeup. People won't see your real face. This is your face, man. Just plug into the amplifier and be entrusted this is your sound." He went on to say, "Ever since I was a child, I was always attracted to melodies. Whether I hear Jeff Beck, a choir, an ocean, or the wind, there's always a melody in there. I don't think you would ever be going out on a limb to say Santana was one of the best melodic guitar players ever." Alvin Lee once said that he would walk out on stage and the crowd would be going crazy, screaming and shouting, and this bothered him. Why? Because he hadn't played a note yet. He said, "I'd play a rotten show, everybody would come back afterward and say it was great. I'd play a good show, and everybody would say it was great too." When the managers and agents all told him, "Alvin, you can make millions of dollars," he said, "What's the point of having millions if I'm crazy?" Like most managers and agents, they all wanted the money, of course, and they didn't care about the feelings of the artist who created the music. In 1969, Alvin and 10 years after played Woodstock in August. Now many consider this the turning point for the band. And in a way it was, but not until the Woodstock movie came out in March 1970 did 10 years after break big. Alvin said right around this time, and just after the Woodstock Festival, they were playing mostly the 2,000 to 3,000 seat underground clubs here in America. But after that movie came out was when they started playing the larger 20,000 seat venues. Then 6 months after they broke big, Alvin started hating it. Why? Alvin enjoyed playing those smaller clubs where the people came in to listen. The music came first. And once a band jumps up to the big venues, that part goes away. But bigger venues mean more people, more record sales, and of course, more money. You know, this isn't an uncommon occurrence with musicians. It has happened to so many. Everyone from Humble Pie to the Beatles, they all felt like they were just puppets up there on the big stage. The Beatles just quit touring. Steve Marriott of Humble Pie went back to just playing the smaller clubs and said he was much happier doing it. Alvin was to do the same in due time. When asked about his guitar playing, Alvin had this to say: "I basically play guitar from the hip, an instinctive reaction, if you like, because I'm not one for practicing. I'm a jammer. My attitude was to go for it, and on a good night, I could get it." Back in the day, Alvin was considered one of the fastest guitar players out there, and in my opinion, he was. I guess the best way to sum up his playing can only be done by listening to him, and one of his better performances was on that Woodstock movie, doing the song "I'm Going Home." You get a good feel for his all-around talent. Not only could he play, he could sing. He had charisma. Alvin was a whole package. And of course, the band was tight. Leo Lyons on bass, Rick Lee on drums were great, and Chick Churchill rounding out the four-piece group on keys. There's quite a few good live videos on 10 Years After, and I'll leave a few in the description for any of you who want to check them out. His main guitar was called Big Red, so let's talk about it here for a bit. There's always been some good discussions on Alvin's Red Gibson ES-335. Many say it's a 1959. Alvin says, "My famous 1958 Gibson 335 that I bought for £45 in Nottingham was the best investment I ever made. It even had a fitted case." Although the guitar has been referred to as a 59 model, it's sort of impossible to know the year and make. The neck was replaced in the early 1970s after he broke the original at the Marquee in London after accidentally ramming it into the club's low ceiling. As a result, the serial number on the headstock had no bearing on the guitar's year of manufacture. An orange label inside the 335's upper F-hole bears the original serial identification, but it was obscured when the body's interior was painted over in black, presumably to make the F-holes appear darker. Gibson's original factory-built number, which would have been visible through the lower bout's F-hole, had been similarly covered up. Alvin has really modded the guitar and added a single-coil pickup between the original PAFs. He calls himself a dabbler. I'm always changing pickups and rewiring. The Gibson has the original 58 humbuckers with covers removed and a fender pickup in the middle to give it a bit more top. It's good for the studio. The single-coil pickup in between the two humbuckers has its own volume pot that I use as a blend control. I always liked the Strat sound, but when I play the Strat, I find my little finger on the right hand keeps turning the volume knob down unintentionally. I figured that by adding a Strat back pickup to my 335, I'd have the best of both worlds. Alvin has also removed the Bigsby, which he replaced in 1970 with a TP6 tailpiece. The Bigsby probably had tuning issues that promoted this change. And of course, it's covered in stickers. They just got thrown on, actually, Alvin explained. But when I broke the neck at the Marquee, I sent it back to Gibson for repair, and when it was returned, they had lacquered over all the stickers, so they couldn't come off. The original neck had a fretboard with the dot inlays. The replacement has block inlays. Its serial number indicates that it was manufactured sometime between 1970 and 72. Alvin has tried many different guitar styles during his career, but clearly favored Big Red, saying, "The 335 is still my main guitar. I think it's the size of the body. It fits me quite well. I love to play Strats, but I prefer to play them sitting down. I enjoy Les Pauls, but they feel too small and heavy. I'm just used to the 335. Alvin Lee died on March 6, 2013 in Spain. He died from complications following a routine surgical procedure to correct an atrial arrhythmia, which is basically an irregular heartbeat. He was 68 years old. Alvin Lee was known for being a private person, and he kept his personal life out of the public eye as much as possible. "I'm no great guitarist technically," Leslie West said in a 1987 interview with Guitar World. "I only play with these two fingers, holding up the index and ring finger on his left hand." Now, I know as a kid growing up and learning the guitar in the 70s, I sure knew who Leslie West was, and it didn't make any difference if he was a technical guitar player or not. I just knew I loved his sound and playing, and I still do today. But many of my friends who didn't play guitar didn't pay much attention to him after the hit song Mississippi Queen left the airwaves. Why was that? Well, let's take a look back and maybe we can figure this out together. He was born Leslie Abel Weinstein, October 22, 1945 in New York. When he was 10 years old, his grandma took him down to see Jackie Gleason on stage. But for some reason that day, Gleason wasn't there, and the Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey stage show with their orchestra took his place. Now, Leslie wasn't too thrilled about that, as he wanted to see Jackie Gleason. And it wasn't until the Dorseys introduced their guest that he sat up and took notice. That guest was Elvis Presley, and that day, the guitar seed was planted. His father took off and left the family when Leslie was in the 5th grade, and his parents would end up divorcing. After the divorce, Leslie was to change his name from Weinstein to West. As a teen, him and his brother Larry formed a group called the Vagrants. They would copy a lot of Beatles and Rolling Stones songs. Now here's a clip of Leslie playing the guitar with the Vagrants at age 19. And this was lip-synced for some movie. But I thought the guitar he was playing was pretty cool looking. Someone told me it was a Dan Electro, but I'm not really sure. If anyone knows more about it, leave some info in the comments section. And one more guitar story from Leslie is his first bought, a 58 Sunburst Strat. Leslie told the story this way. "I got it with my bar mitzvah money," he laughed. "I started copying licks off records by some of my favorite players, Albert King and B.B. King and Eric Clapton. Then in 1964 came the Vagrants, the band my brother and I formed. We built a good reputation around the area, but you know what happened with that Strat? When the Vagrants started, we all wanted new guitars. So I traded it for, get this, a Kent, a red Kent with 3 pickups. It was really disgusting, man." Leslie's brother Larry, who was the bass player in the Vagrants, told him they needed to go hear the group Cream, who was produced by Felix Pappalardi, who had also produced a couple of songs for the Vagrants. So they went to the Village Theater, which was later to be called the Fillmore East, to hear him. Leslie said they did some LSD, and when the curtain came up and the show started, he pretty much got a mind-blowing experience. He turned to his brother and said, "Man, we suck. Why don't we sound like Cream?" Larry said, "Because we don't practice enough." So Leslie says after hearing Cream, he realized that they did suck. And he said this is when he really started to get down to work on his playing and singing. But the Vagrants just couldn't get things going any further. They tried recording some more songs, but just really wasn't prepared for it. Leslie says that they just couldn't get on tape in the studio what they were live. So it was time for Leslie to move on. He started putting a new group together. He had an organ player who played the bass pedals and a drummer. They played a few gigs early in 1969, opening for Jethro Tull and Jeff Beck and a few others. They had some good material worked up, so Leslie called Felix Pappalardi, and Felix said, "Great, let's record it." Well, it seems the recording didn't go too well. The drummer wasn't good enough, and Felix just shut it down. Now this really got to Leslie. He had practiced and really worked hard for this session, but he wasn't one to give up easily. He said he conned Felix into playing bass on his album. When asked how he conned him, he said, "There's never been a fat and a skinny guy on stage. We can't miss." Now I was terrified, but he bought it, hook, line, and sinker. This does sound like a Leslie West story. And if you ever listened to or read any of his interviews, you know Leslie was a real character when telling a story. If it's true or not, It's anybody's guess. But either way, the recording got underway. The album, titled Mountain, was recorded and released in July of 1969. Felix Pappalardi played bass and organ, and N.D. Smart took over on drums. After the recording session, they brought on Steve Knight to play organ and started playing out. They played a couple of gigs and then went on to take the stage at Woodstock. How they got on the bill at Woodstock, Leslie says, Jimi Hendrix's agent was our agent. Jimi was like the unofficial headliner of Woodstock. So, the agent must have said, if you want Hendrix, you have to take this other group, Mountain. They paid us $5,000, and we did get paid. We went on Saturday night, but they lost our film, so we weren't in the movie. But what Leslie heard, and most believe is true, is the manager wouldn't sign off on the bands appearing in the film. Leslie went on to say, he probably didn't get enough money. Another stupid move we made. In September of that year, they brought in Corky Lang to play drums and went on to record 3 more albums, Climbing in 1970, in Nantucket Sleigh Ride, and Flowers of Evil in 1971, with Climbing and Nantucket Sleigh Ride both going gold, but the band was to break up in early 1972. If you listen to them 4 albums in order, you can really hear Leslie's guitar playing, his tone, and his style evolve. In them 3 short years, from 1969 through 1971, he went from a really good guitarist to a great one. I think this had a lot to do with finding the right tone to fit his riffs he heard in his head. So I did a little looking around and found some interviews, and this is how this kind of all came about, including how he ended up with that Les Paul Jr. First off, how the Les Paul Jr. got into his hands. Now, we know Leslie listened to Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix a lot. He said, I never heard anybody play the guitar like they did. Now, you have to take into consideration this was at a time when Leslie was still into R&B and Delta blues some. By now, Eric and especially Jimi were really becoming the innovators to this new sound. So a friend of Leslie's named Waddy Wachtel, that name should ring a bell with some of you. Well, he lived in the same building as Leslie. Leslie said, he taught me how to play real guitar. I lived on one side of the building and he lived on the other. It was in Forest Hill Plaza, a brand new high-rise. I'd hear a Beatles song come on the radio, and I'd go down to the elevator and take it up to his house. And by the time I got to his house, he already knew the song, and he'd teach it to me. Now, Waddy had bought himself a George Harrison model Rickenbacker 12-string. So he sold me his Les Paul Jr., and that's how I started playing that guitar. I got it from Waddy. Now, to get the sound and tone, he said, to make up for my lack of speed, I added in a lot of vibrato from the blues guys. I worked on my squeals and pig grunts, as he called them, referring to the octave harmonic screams he used on many riffs and solos. And Leslie said, you gotta have the Les Paul Jr. to do 'em right. Because of the single pickup, the way the string can bend down when you hit 'em. If there was a neck pickup, it'd be in the way. Without it, you have all the room you need. And his tone back then came from 2 Sun stacks with a Coliseum PA head. He said they were Jimi Hendrix old amps, retolexed and reconed. Those PA heads had 4 inputs and a master volume, which started the distortion thing on me. I'd turn the mic volume all the way up and then bring the master way up and overdrive the thing like crazy. You know, when you listen to these guys talk about tone and how they got these great sounds back then on dinosaur equipment, it's pretty cool. From what I read, this was the same amps that Leslie used in the studio on the early albums. Now, of course, as time moved on, the equipment changed, but by then Leslie has established himself and his sound. You know, I don't expect this video to get many views except mostly from the players. Leslie West was not a household name that the average rock fan knows. It doesn't carry as much weight as, say, a Hendrix, a Clapton, or a Page. I'm sure some of you have a different opinion, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section. Mountain didn't stay together long, about 3 years. They did a lot of touring during that time and did a lot of drugs. And bass player-producer Felix Pappalardi said he had to quit because of a hearing issue. Leslie said it was because he had to go in the hospital for drug rehab. But either way, Leslie and Corky Laing decided to keep going on. So Leslie decided to call up one of his idols, and him and Corky forged a new alliance with ex-Cream bassist Jack Bruce. This group's debut album, Why Don't Ya?, appeared in 1972, followed a year later with Whatever Turns You On. The West Bruce and Laing trio proved short-lived though, dissolving prior to the 1974 release of the Live and Kickin' concert set. Now Leslie and Laing continued to work together occasionally after the trio breakup, but I think Leslie was a little burned out by then. We worked about 285 jobs a year, one-nighters, he said. It was killing, man. Really stupid. I didn't enjoy myself, got too concerned with being famous, and got into drugs. And so it was that he found himself in Milwaukee in 1977 shedding some bad drug habits. I stopped playing, didn't even want any guitars around. Wes did retire from music for a time, then cleaned up, and again reformed Mountain with Corky Laing on drums and bassist Mark Clark. Felix Pappalardi had been shot and killed by his wife Gail in 1983. She shot him with a Derringer he gave her. She only got 4 years in jail. She said it was an accident. Leslie said it was a load of shit. Leslie West has played and recorded with some of the best there ever was, from jamming with Hendrix to recording with The Who, for which he received a platinum record that hung on his wall. When it comes to his peers, he was always looked up to. There are some out there who consider Mountain a one-hit wonder with the song Mississippi Queen. And maybe by the numbers, I guess you could say that's true. Drummer Corky Laing had the hook, and he came to Leslie's apartment in Manhattan. He says, "Look, I have this lyric, Mississippi Queen." He said when he was in Nantucket playing this little bar and the power went out, he was just playing drums and shouting the words, "Mississippi Queen, do you know what I mean?" And he's watching this girl dance, and he just kept repeating it over and over. So Leslie started fooling around with the guitar riff and came up with the music hook. After that, they went real quick into the studio, and Felix told Corky to count it off, and he counted it off with a cowbell, and that sounded good, so we left it in there. The only thing Leslie never liked about the recording was the piano in it. He said, "I hated it." The Climbing album went gold, and the following album, Nantucket Sleigh Ride, did the same. But as far as hit songs, the radio back then didn't push any of Mountain's songs very hard after Mississippi Queen. For myself, I wore the grooves out of Leslie West's first 4 albums. I just always felt he never got the commercial success that he deserved back in the 70s. Maybe it was bad management, or maybe the songs just weren't radio friendly enough. I do know that many musicians look up to him and have a lot of respect for his playing. How about you? Leave a comment and let's hear your thoughts.